So we're dealing here uh, with a reality of life. So you can't, there are efforts to suppress one part of a, a polarity will only evoke energies from the part that was suppressed. So it's not a matter of being able to totally do one of them and not the other. You have to take both into account if you want to be wise, if you want to be sustainable, if you want to avoid a lot of problems that show up. So this is part of uh, being a wise society, a wise democracy, is recognizing when the dissonance that you're being faced with is not a problem to solve, but a polarity to relate to and manage. Uh, so in this pattern, I list a whole pile of uh, different polarities, and I can talk a bit about each of them. But we're looking for some kind of balance or coexistence, synergy between these different things, rather than having supporting one of them at the expense of the other. So divergence, convergence, this is a very hot one in process issues. There are processes which create divergence. It's like open-ended questions, and suddenly everybody's different perspectives show up as you have a conversation that's sort of open-ended. It's like, what is art? And everybody is saying what they think art is. And suddenly you go, whoa, come on, some of these people are ridiculous and some of these people are geniuses, and what are we talking about here? And suddenly there's all this disturbance and dissonance. Then there's processes to help create convergence. Consensus is sort of, the name consensus helps you think in terms of convergence, but voting in a system where people respect the results of the vote as a convergent process. And dynamic facilitation has an interesting thing where it is supporting a convergence that isn't so much coming together from different places as emerging out of some common ground. But again, that can be a convergent, a sense of people coming together. Self and other, that's obvious. We all have that. I want this and they want that, or we are better than they are, or I am a separate being from the rest of the world. And there's the other. Anything that is outside of the self is the other. And one of the ongoing challenges of life is, how do you relate to the other? But having a balance, you have to serve yourself, you have to serve the other, you have to be compassionate with yourself, be compassionate with the other. How do you navigate the dynamic tension between these? How do you learn? How do you bring forth what you have to say into to another person, and have them bring forth what they have to say? And there's some potential learning and wisdom to get from doing that well. That would be an example of evolutionary vitality, not just coexistence, but actually serving the healthy development of each other, healthy development of our understandings, our relationships, whatever. Individual, collective, individual rights versus collective well-being. So is there a way to create synergy between those? Can we create systems where individuals can serve the community by being who they most essentially are? And are there, collective, can there be a culture where people are trying to support the individuals to be who they most effectively and deeply are? There's a synergy where you can do things you couldn't do otherwise if you didn't have the community, and where the community can do things it couldn't do otherwise without the individual. And so there's a mutual respect and support both ways on that. It's not a matter of defending. The individual has to defend themselves from the collective that's going to oppress them, or the collective has to defend itself and the individual is going to disrupt them. So these are different takes on how to treat polarities. Material spiritual. So the science or spirituality have the real answers to human life. Well, the fact is there are limits to how far material reality can go in making long-term benefits, because there's the material. To the extent you are materialist, you are trying to be values free. You're trying to just describe what is, but what is doesn't tell you what you want. What is doesn't tell you what should be. And spiritual awareness, a deep understanding of our connectedness and where our life energy comes from, is really important in directing us. So having like materialist science help us understand what is, so that our spiritual longings can be served in ways that make sense in terms of the way the universe is organized. And that material science, there's some of the material science that's being developed and the technologies that are being developed are potentially disastrous, and spiritual based ethical principles can help us moderate the dangers of that. Subjective objective, is what I see what is? Is there some outside objectivity that is more real and important than what I experience? And it's like, yes, both of those are kind of true. Having objective reality always used to dominate what somebody sees and believes and thinks, they will resist that, or the whole piles of their life energy will be suppressed, and you will degrade somebody. I remember having a picture that I drew when I was a kid analyzed by my father in detail and critiqued, and I didn't write much art after that. It's like, this is the objective dominating the subjective, and the subjective dominating the objective is like, what I believe is what is, and you can't tell me otherwise. There's a psychological dynamic of what's called a confirmation bias, where you only will take in information that supports what you already believe, and this is demonstrated. Lots of people, most of us have that in one way or another, and that is giving preference to the subjective over the objective. And the fact is that there's objective reality is so much constructed by the interactions of subjective entities, and respecting that and letting the play of objective and subjective inform each other and help each other help. Both of those perspectives have gifts to give to our broader understanding and engagement. Immediate and long term, that's an old one. This is like, you want to grow up and be an adult, you have to set aside immediate gratification. But if you're only thinking in terms of long term, your life may become very dry and drab. Everything is a sacrifice for the future. And so there's a dance. How do we satisfy, as the original sustainability definition says, how do we satisfy the needs of current generations without undermining the capacity of future generations to meet their needs? How, in fact, can we look at ways to satisfy long-term needs that actually serve us now? It's like, it's like the ability to diet, you in long-term need, you want to be healthy by eating a healthy diet, and your immediate urge is to eat all this unhealthy junk food or whatever. There's an approach to dieting that says, just pay attention to what you're eating. Don't get into a big deal about how much you're eating or which things you're eating. Just pay attention, and that deepens your immediate experience, and you tend to eat better food and less food when you really pay attention to what you're eating. So this is an example of synergy between immediate and long term, and we can always do conscious inquiry to look for, how could these things that seem so different, how could they be actually synergized, not just coexisted and balanced, but synergized, made into the fact that both of them are there generating their influence is a highly desirable thing. You wouldn't want just one of them. gravity and levity. This is, you could look at it in a purely physical way. I wasn't thinking of that so much as seriousness versus humor and lightweight, and that too much of either of those degrades life. If you are always bright side, funny, you're missing a lot of the meaning of what life is about. And if you are always being serious, not a lot of people want to relate to you, and your life becomes grayer and grayer and more cynical, probably. So being able to dance on both sides, and there's a guy named Swami Vyandananda, that's his stage name, who does jokes for social change. And so there's depths and surfaces. This is related to the gravity levity. It's like being delving into the depths of what's going on, what's important, whatever, who we are. You can go on there forever and never actually find something that can that applies to real life. Real life is lived so much on the surfaces, and being able to pay attention to the surface manifestations of things, informed by in-depth understandings, and to recognize when you're going into the depths that you want to stay related to the surfaces. It's funny. It's almost like a diver with their there's a tube going up to the surface to give them more oxygen to be able to breathe. So the depths and surfaces, another one of the polarities. You really can't have either one in a healthy way. Safety and challenge, there's a whole pattern that's given to that. Safety first and then challenge. People will not be able to bring their life energy to the challenge if they don't have some sense of safety. And sometimes that sense of safety is not objective, it's purely subjective. The person has a sense of you cannot kill the spiritual being. You cannot kill the spirit. You can kill the body, but you can't kill the spirit. People who have that perspective are not afraid of anything, and they are so much more ready to take the challenge, which is part of the spiritual basis of powerful nonviolent movements like Gandhi and King had. You can beat me, you can jail me, but you can't harm my spirit unless I let you. And to be able to just seek safety means you never meet any challenges, and that is a problem in terms of real life, because real life's going to end up challenging you. And seeking challenge with no safety, you're going to be wiped out pretty soon if you don't attend to your safety at all. If you're just climbing the side of the mountain with no safety stuff. So that's another synergy, and they can feed each other. If you provide a safe space for people to take on real challenges that take people beyond their comfort zone, but not so far that they shut down or destroy themselves or other people. Equality, freedom, such an interesting dynamic. I didn't even think of those usually as being opposites, but that was given as an example once, where equality, the more, if you want a society that is very equal, you have to clamp down on some freedoms, because if you give people full freedom, their diversity, their feedback loops are going to magnify their diversity. So the person who is more capable is going to become more capable in a totally free environment, and they're going to accumulate more reputation or more wealth or whatever. And then there's going to be a response. You got to stamp down on that. And if you end up trying to push equality too far, people are going to start to resist the limits on freedom that go with that. So is there a way to have equality of opportunity and freedom to do up to a point, and to recognize the kinds of freedom that are actually empowered by operating within constraints? It's like the artist who has their medium to work with. What kind of creativity and freedom can be expressed within the limits of that medium? So there are ways to have freedom that does not encroach on on others, and there's ways to have equality. Equality of opportunity does not encroach on anybody's freedom. So again, trying to balance these and explore synergies. And there are hundreds of other. These are many. I've given a good chunk of them so you can see the scope of what I'm talking about here. But the fact is, life is filled with these kinds of things, and it takes some perception to look and see, oh, this is the piece that we're missing, and we can't push this one side except in an effort to get more balance, but we don't want to push it for some kind of absolute equality or absolute freedom. They're headed towards collision and social disruption and folly. So examples that polarity management, a lot of the insights that I had on this came from a field that is specifically called polarity management. And the workshop I attended on that had equality and freedom as their examples. And they're noting that how, as you try to maximize any one side, energies come from the other side to counter that. And so instead of allowing the feedback loop to be this extreme crashing back and forth, you can manage it to be a more quieter, synergy-seeking kind of dance between the polarities. In the yin-yang symbol from Taoism, actually, there's the fact that there's these two little fishes going head to tail is like suggesting this dance, this interdependent dance. And then there's this interbeing, this mutual definition that is implied by the eye of the little fish in the yin-yang, that the opposite, within equality is freedom, and within freedom is equality. And there's a surface dance, while in the heart of it, black and white, they define each other. White doesn't exist without black, and black doesn't exist without white. So that's a deep lesson from Taoism, and recognizing that intrinsic dance and being able to play in it as a partner consciously is what Taoism is trying to invite us into, or one of the things Taoism is trying to invite us into. The dialectic, Hegel's dialectic, which is often associated with Marxism, it was one of its inspirations, is the sense that you can have two very different beliefs about the world. Somebody comes up with some statement of this is the way things are, and somebody comes up with another statement that says, no, that's not the way things are, this is the way things are. And that there is a dynamic tension created from what the dialectic calls a thesis and the antithesis. And out of that comes a synthesis, either with tremendous violence and suffering, or through conscious understanding and deepening, that there is a dance of opposites going on, and that the synthesis it comes up with is an evolutionary phase. It becomes a new thesis, and something else becomes its antithesis, and the interactions between those generate the next synthesis. But it goes on forever. There's no arrival there. Transpartisan dialogues is, let's get the liberals and the conservatives to talk together, the right and the left, the Republicans and the Democrats. Let's have them respectfully talk together and look for potential connections and things that they can both support, etc. That's at a political level. Science and religion dialogues. I was part of an open space conference that had a dozen evolutionary scientists, a dozen evolutionary spiritual people, and a dozen evolutionary activists. It was one of the most intriguing, 5-day long conference. They're very fascinating. And there's many science and religion things trying to put those two things together, sense that they each have important gifts, and so often they are framed as opposing forces in society. Ken Wilber, philosopher Ken Wilber, has a whole world integral philosophy, a very powerful thinker, and he has a quadrant model where the two axes of the quadrants are internal and external, and individual and collective. So you have a, what is your internal, your individual internal life, and your individual external life, which is more of behavior. It's consciousness versus behavior. And then at a collective level, you have the internal collective is sort of the culture, beliefs, values, whatever, and the external is the systems and the actions that go on, and that any effort to change society should embrace all of those four quadrants. It's an oversimplified model, but it's a very powerful one, and it's built specifically off of polarities. The dynamic facilitation I mentioned earlier, evokes polarities that then become conscious and serve the evolution of the group because of the kind of consciousness that is evoked, and the validation of efforts to understand, efforts to be creative, and contribute whatever person has to contribute to the discussion, so that their piece of the puzzle gets added in, and pretty soon everybody is looking at the whole puzzle and what to do about it. So there's a evocative sense of using polarities as energy for forward motion. Dynamic facilitation loves conflict and loves translating its evolutionary power